As your network automation practice evolves, so should your tools. Don't manage your collections of Ansible playbooks and Python scripts artisanally. Move up to Itential and load your automations onto a scalable platform your whole team can use. Visit itential.com to find out more. That's itential.com.
Hey, it's Drew and Jana. News about the HPE Juniper merger dropped the day after we recorded Network Break. So Jana and I have convened for a quick add-on to the episode. A couple of notes. I did the audio editing on this drop-in section, so if it doesn't sound as good as the rest of the show, that's on me. And besides the HPE Juniper news, we'll talk about enhanced features from Backbox, the first Ultra Ethernet NIC, quantum announcements from Cisco and Juniper, and more. One other programming note, we won't have an episode on July 7th because of the Independence Day holiday here in the US on the 4th. We'll be back on July 14th. Jana, thanks for reconvening at a different day and time to do this. Appreciate it. I think it's the first time we've done this for Network Break.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Drew, and I think it's the right thing to do. Definitely, if there's a first time, this merits it.
Okay, so let's dive in. So HPE and Juniper have settled with the U.S. Justice Department over HPE's proposed $14 billion acquisition of Juniper. The merger can go through, but it comes with two conditions. The first is HPE and Juniper must license Juniper's AI Ops for Mist source code to at least one third party. The second is HPE has to divest its instant on-campus network business, which includes campus switches, APs, and security gateways, and instant on is aimed at SMBs. John, I feel like the gnarly issue here really is that licensing of AI ops for Mist source code. So let's dig into that. Any comments at the top before we get into the details?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think some of this is just, what's the right word? Covering up, because there really was no justification for putting the brakes on this entire merger. So they kind of had to say, well, we needed to do a few things and now it's better. You mentioned the gnarly issue is the AI ops, and I know we'll talk about that in just a second. Overall, I do think that actually makes it somewhat better, and we can talk about why. I think the instant on thing is just sort of nonsense that says, oh, we've done something here. I'm sorry, but I can't take any of this too seriously, other than the fact that it has a serious business impact on the companies and users. But it just seems like a lot of fluffing around to sound important, like, oh yes, we took this under serious consideration and we made some decisions. So here they are.
Yeah, my feelings exactly. All right, so let's dig into the details. So the way it works is the settlement requires an auction for the AI ops for Mist source code to be held within 180 days. The licensee or that whoever wins the auction has to be acceptable to the U.S. Justice Department, so they still get a say. The licensee that wins the auction can request up to 30 Juniper engineers and 25 Juniper salespeople who are familiar with Mist to be transferred to the licensee. The settlement also allows for a second organization to also get a license to the source code if two or more bids come in at over 8 million. That's a pretty low bar, so I anticipate we will see multiple bids. That means a possible two competitors with access to the AI ops for Mist source code. I should note the second licensee, like if somebody gets that second bid, they don't get the engineers and salespeople. That's just for whoever has the highest bid. If the auction doesn't happen within the time frame I outlined earlier, the Justice Department can appoint a trustee who will then oversee the auction and carry it out. The source code license does not include access to the Mist brand, so you can get the source code, but you can't call it Mist. I'll note that HPE is trying to downplay this license ruling by saying in its press release, after the close, HPE will facilitate limited access to Juniper's advanced Mist AI Ops technology. Giving the source code to two other competitors does not sound like limited access, but I guess that's a press release for you.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, realistically, first of all, I read that and I sort of started laughing. I'm like, yes, Juniper gets layoffs without having layoffs because the auction can request the 30 Juniper engineers. Now, they're going to give their best and brightest, of course. Right. So this is actually, I'm sure Juniper is just sort of chortling over that one. It's like, hey, can we keep on the, lowest performing engineers and salespeople so we can give them to whoever wants them? And of course, the other thing that's kind of fun here is since slavery is outlawed in the United States, they can't guarantee that the engineers and salespeople will, in fact, stay with the new licensees. So if they don't feel like working for these new companies, oh well. I'm sure there's some legalese built in there that if they leave within a certain amount of time, the licensee can request a new one. But at some point, it just gets silly.
I think there's a year clause in there that if for the engineers and salespeople transferred, they can't be hired back within a year by their original company.
Yeah, but I mean, they can quit. And if they quit, what happens? Nothing, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't sound like there's any recourse on the actual individual. They can decide to leave if they want, but then they can't. But there is a clause in there that like Juniper can't hire them back. So yeah, if they're out, they're out.
Well, yes, I wouldn't want to go back to Juniper if Juniper had just traded me anyway. So I think that's pretty safe. Anyway, honestly, I think this is fairly reasonable in the sense that if the goal of the Justice Department is to create more competitiveness, the whole point is that being able to manage an integrated network is a competitive is something competitive, and I think it's actually valuable to have that management capability out there. That said, I kind of side with HPE on this. I mean, I know a press release is a press release, but the reality is people don't take management software seriously. Cisco is now talking a big game with its own management software, but number one, Cisco's way too arrogant, and I'm picking up Cisco because they are the obvious competitor here. One would expect they might bid, but someone like Cisco is not going to buy somebody else's technology because they're confident they have the best technology in-house. So even if they did buy it, it would just be to annoy Juniper and HPE, not to do anything with it, which happens a lot.
Well, here's something that I am not 100% clear about as to what falls under the AI ops for Mist source code. Does that include WLAN operations? Does that include Marvis? Does that include the work they've done to bring AI ops to the switching portfolio and the network portfolio? Or is it just a piece of management software? My impression is it's Mist, that you can license Mist, AI technology that Juniper acquired and has really helped them break into the WLAN market.
Yeah, I'm going to make the assumption for now that it's missed. I think it may well be one of those things that the courts have not yet actually decided what's in, what's out, and there may be long court battles where, the licensee says, I thought I was getting X and I got Y. I just want to remind everybody that most of the people that make these decisions on the legal side of the house really have very little understanding of how the technology works. They rely on technologists, but everybody who is close enough to the technology to have some insight may have an agenda. Certainly if they're working for the courts, they might. So I just remember, way back in the day when AT&T and what became Alcatel-Lucent at the time was splitting off. I remember the lawyers kind of saying to the technologists something like, AT&T has 5 Class A addresses? Maybe it was only 3. What value does this have? And all the engineers poker face went, none, because it was true at the time you couldn't actually auction off Class A addresses. So the lawyers were like, oh, okay, AT&T can keep that. I mean, that gives you a sense of the depth of their understanding of the technical components here.
Yeah, so let's put on the table, my analysis is assuming that if you are one of the people who bid to license the source code, you essentially have Mist and could develop it yourself and sell it as an AI operating WLAN and network platform, which to me raises some questions. So first, can Cisco bid? If Cisco can get a license and start selling a product, is that what the Justice Department intended, that the organization with the biggest market share in this space now can get access to this product?
Well, I mean, they have their fig leaf here where it says, oh, well, the bidder must be acceptable to the Justice Department. So there's sort of a second step here. The licensee has to be acceptable to the U.S. Justice Department. So let's agree that for now they have a blacklist of people that they will under no circumstances allow licensing to, and we'll talk about that in a second. It's possible that Cisco's actually on that for the reasons that you cite. But again, the chances of Cisco actually doing that, they might get the license just for the hell of it, just to annoy HPE. But you got to look at the history of management products in networking. If selling management products as a standalone were actually lucrative, Cabletron would still be around.
Well, again, though, I have to say, I feel like if we're talking about the full Mist platform, it's not just management, it is actual operations. You can really automate your WLAN and network platform with Mist. So it's not just about management. There's an operational piece here as well.
Yes, but I mean, I think that's just the difference between, several generations back and today. The main thing is that, it's not like people are selling an awful lot of operations tools other than third party that help you across the board with everything. So I'm not sure that there's that there's market value to Cisco is kind of what I'm saying. So Cisco can certainly bid because it doesn't seem like there's any constraints on anyone bidding. They may be on a blacklist for not being able to make the purchase, and they may, even if they do, it's highly unlikely that they'll do anything with it because they've got their own technology, they've got their own capabilities, and they're sufficiently arrogant that they are not really going to believe that Mist has some kind of competitive advantage. And that's something else we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah. So somebody else, I wonder, can Huawei bid?
I'm sure they're on the not acceptable list. I mean, there must be a blacklist, and it may have only one name on it, but it would be Huawei. I'm 100% certain the Justice Department will say no Huawei.
I would tend to agree with you, but with this current administration, who knows? So a question is out there. I'm also wondering, would somebody like Arista be interested? Arista has a WLAN portfolio. It has not done stellar in the market. Could this be an opportunity for them to try to find a way to break in?
And if they were to do so, all I can say is, well, that would actually prove the Justice Department's point, right? It does create greater creativity. The other fun thing is the bidder may not be a vendor at all. The bidder may be a VAR or an integrator or something else. So yeah, I think there are an awful lot of possibilities here other than that another box vendor is going to bid. I think a VAR or a third-party provider actually makes a lot of sense. PE, maybe not so much because I'm not sure what the exit strategy is, but then that's why I'm not one. So,
Another question. So again, and this is all under the assumption that Juniper or / HP is also going to continue to sell Mist. So it's essentially going to be competing with itself down the line. Another question I have is, could a licensee at some point open source the software? There is a clause in the ruling that says, quote, the licensees shall have the right to further develop and innovate the AI ops for Mist source code and any improvements to and derivative of the AI ops for Mist source code developed after the license date by the licensee will be owned by the licensee. So, I'm not an IP lawyer, but is there a door open in that language for a license holder maybe to someday open source this? Again, thinking if Cisco wants to stick its thumb in the eye of a competitor.
I am not a lawyer, but my mother always said I'd be a good one, and I hang around with IP lawyers, so that's close enough for a couple technologists. I would say the answer to your question is no. As I read this, it says further develop and innovate. So number one, the source code itself is not granted, you don't get ownership of you have the ownership of the source code, but you can't just sort of take it and open source it. It also says improvements to and derivatives of developed by the licensee, which would seem to preclude by anyone else under open source. Now, of course, that's the kind of thing you can fight lots of legal battles on, but I think they're very clear here that they're saying if, say, Acme Corp wins the code, they get the code, but if they try to open source it, they do not have the right to do that. And if they make improvements improvements to and derivative of, continue to add on, so to speak, they can own the add-on capability, but it doesn't seem like they have the right to open source the add-on capability. Now, that said, it says it has the right to develop and innovate. So the loophole you're looking at is, could they take the core source code and just freely drop it into open source? I'd have to double check to see what all the legalese ruling is. That may be a loophole that somebody's intentionally going to do, but I can't see it here. It seems like it's worded to preclude that. And so certainly if someone tried to do that, I think if I were HPE, I'd sue, and I'd have grounds for a suit and possibly a settlement. So
Sure. Okay. If you're an IP person out there listening and you have an opinion you want to share, packetpushers.net/FU. One other question, did this ruling accomplish its stated goal? So the Justice Department brought the suit because it said the merger would, quote, eliminate fierce head-to-head competition between the companies, raise prices, reduce innovation, and diminish choices for scores of American businesses and institutions. Did they accomplish what they set out to do?
I don't think they hurt things particularly badly, which, when it comes to lawyers meddling in technology, that's actually a win right there. But I think, I made, in what has been my most popular LinkedIn post ever in the history of Jhana, I made the argument that, look, the merger does not reduce competitiveness because it essentially says if you downstream, if you wish to manage an integrated HPE Juniper infrastructure, you can do that. You can do that now, and there was not previously a single source of integrated infrastructure to go to that competed with Cisco at anything like the market share that it needed to. So basically, this creates an actual legitimate competitor to Cisco, legitimate from the standpoint of someday being able to envision being able to manage the entire integrated infrastructure as integrated infrastructure, which did not previously exist. So the key to all of this is the management. And I think the fact that they are requiring the management capabilities to at least be out, and again, management and operation, but also management to be outsourced, to be licensed, is at least a nod in the direction that they understand that the main thing about the competitiveness here is management and operations of integrated infrastructure. So net, I don't think I think this was this increased competitiveness from the get-go for those reasons, and any claims that it didn't were stupidly applying we had, a top 4 competitors and now we only have top 3, or top 3 and now we only have top 2, or whatever. That's kind of goofy because it ignores the very real fact that somebody isn't a competitor unless you can manage the infrastructure you get from them, and they can give you an end-to-end infrastructure. That's what we get with this merger. And I don't think the licensing of the code really changes that. So I think the goal was accomplished before this thing ever got pulled up in front of the U.S. Department of Justice. And as I said, they failed. They failed to screw it up. So yeah, it still increases competitiveness.
I guess I always thought that the reasoning was flawed because when you look at the market numbers, Cisco. At the time the acquisition was proposed, Cisco had 46% of the market. A combined HPE and Juniper would have had 17%. So you could argue that if you want more competition, HPE and Juniper coming together actually are potentially a stronger competitor against the market incumbent.
That's exactly what I said, but not for the reasons of market share, because you can always counter that by saying, but there were 3 and now there are 2. And that is exactly the pushback I got in LinkedIn. But you're an idiot. You don't understand because there were 3 and now there are 2. And I'm like, no, you don't understand, because the point is the combined HPE and Juniper isn't useful if it just sits there and each company is operated independently. The point is they had very strategic plans to do the integration and apply the integration across the portfolio of both companies. And that means that 17% market share is a real competitor as opposed to just something on a spreadsheet because of the management and operational integration. Because one of the things we found years ago was when we were trying to validate Cisco's claim that that an integrated infrastructure is operationally more efficient. And so we went out and interviewed hundreds of network engineers and asked them very detailed questions about their operations. And we came away with two glaringly obvious things. Number one, it's impossible to prove the case because nobody had a 100% single vendor solution. However, there were some intriguing ideas that the more that you had, the more likely you were to be efficient to the extent that the data could tell you that. And so the fact that HPE and Juniper were planning to do that integration so that it looked, smelled, and felt like a single vendor, not just happened to share the same logo and branding, is what makes this a more competitive alternative. If what we saw the intriguing ideas to be was true, which is that the value is being able to integrate and manage and operationalize the infrastructure from a single vendor, then yes, you get greater competitiveness by the combination.
I guess I feel like on paper, this ruling does create the possibility for more WLAN competition. I think, though, it also has the opportunity to strengthen Cisco, the incumbent. One, if Cisco actually is able to get a license for this source code, it has an opportunity to grow its market share, or just create uncertainty in the market, which Cisco is also good at doing and leveraging. Two, it also creates, I think, more uncertainty for HPE and Juniper having to deal with licensing their source code to potentially 2 other competitors. So I feel like Cisco seems to be walking away. To my opinion, Cisco, I think, is coming out probably feeling pretty good about this. It's the best outcome they could have gotten out of this. Going forward, and HP and Juniper now can do this merger and make it happen, but they also still have to contend with some of the original issues that they were running into, like running two separate WLAN businesses under the same roof. Still no word on how that's going to be resolved. Anything else folks might want to be thinking about?
No, I think you've pretty much nailed it. I think the one thing is you said there were, two conditions, and we basically agreed not to even talk about the instant on-campus network business. It's pretty much a non-entity as an issue. Like, okay, fine. Essentially, Juniper has to give up a couple salespeople and engineers. HPE has to get rid of a business, which is not really the world-class business out there. I think you're correct, though. I really like your take on this, Drew, that basically just because Cisco is in a position to inject fear, uncertainty, and doubt into the merger, it's more dust. It makes it harder for these two. So anything that does that is a win for Cisco. So yeah, and to the extent that this makes things a little less competitive, probably. I think you're right. I mean, we'll see. It's got to be incredibly frustrating for HP. I'm sure there are lawyers that probably spent the weekend kind of hungover going, good Lord, this was annoying. Why did this have to happen? But here it is. And the other thing I want people to keep in mind is there is a mark in the sand that says source code up to date X, right? Well, they're not going to stop development. And they have an awful lot invested in this. And it's really questionable whether any of the licensees will either have the same resources as the combined company and have the desires the same as the combined company and put that effort into development. So even though it's kind of a loss, really the thing to remember is in this merger, you're picking up the engineering cultures of HPE plus Juniper, which are both incredibly strong engineering cultures and have a historical track record of developing things quickly and well. Nobody's getting that. Like if you were a disorganized mess of a company, and I'm not naming names, if you were a disorganized mess of a company and you acquired this license, it's not going to do you as much good as the same technology in the hands of somebody that's organized and has a strong engineering culture.
Good point. Yeah, that's why I'm thinking like, hey, Arista, here's an opportunity. But and to note, I haven't had a chance to talk with HPE or Juniper. They haven't had much announcements other than sort of a boilerplate press release, which we've linked in the show notes. But Jana, what you just laid out, I'm sure is what, if I were HPE or Juniper, that is probably how I would be spinning this as well. So we'll see what kind of commentary we get from them in the subsequent days as this news gets digested and as everybody gets an opportunity to start asking questions and dig into this more. So appreciate everybody putting up with our drop in here. Hope it was useful. If you got comments, follow-ups, hit us up, packetpushers.net/FU, and we will now take you back to our regularly scheduled network break. John, before we do Red Alert in the news, last week we talked about Cisco announcing some load balancing features in Isovalent, which is their eBPF-based product, and I must have said that I am not seeing eBPF getting a lot of take-up. John Howard dropped me a note on our Packet Pushers community Slack and said, eBPF hasn't taken off. I forget the Cloudflare market share numbers, but whatever share they have of the total flow is completely dependent on that tech. Same with all the DDoS market. So yes.
To be honest, yeah.
Yeah, my apologies. Thank you for pointing that out. He notes that it's actually under the hood in a lot of places, and so maybe that's why I'm not seeing it, because it is kind of invisible. So appreciate John reaching out to fill us in and respond to my comment. And
yes, and we always do like getting that kind of feedback, so please keep it coming.
Yeah, two ways to reach us. One is packetpushers.net/FU. The FU's for follow-up, and that's just an easy way to drop in and write us a note. There's also the Packet Pushers community Slack, where you can be on our Slack with lots of with the Packet Pushers, with a whole bunch of folks in the audience. We always have interesting discussions over there. People are dropping in to tell their war stories or ask questions or share information, share links, share memes and jokes. You can find that at packetpushers.net/community. All right, sorry for all that business, Jana. On to you for Red Alert.
All right, so Cisco ICE now has more remote execution and file upload flaws. Last week, or rather the week ending June 26th, there were 790 CVEs created. and 1505 edited. 302 were rated critical with CVS scores of 9 or higher, and 24 scored 10 out of 10. At the scarier end of things this week, we have critical vulnerabilities in Cisco ICE and ICE PICs, tracked as CVE 2025 2081 and 2082, and scoring 9.8 and 10 respectively. These vulnerabilities and APIs on the appliances allow unauthenticated remote hackers to execute arbitrary code as root.
Oof.
Wow, fun.
Yeah.
Thanks to insufficient validation of user input. They also allow them to upload arbitrary files to a device and then execute them, thanks to lack of file validation checks to prevent uploads to privileged directories. The remote execution vulnerability affects ICE and ICE PIC versions 3.3 and 3.4. The arbitrary upload bug affects only 3.4. Cisco says patch 6 on version 3.3 or patch 2 on version 3.4 will fix the vulnerabilities. You know what to do. If you haven't done it, please go do it. So that's a scary one. Definitely, if you haven't made that fix, stop listening, go fix, and then come back and listen to the rest of the podcast.
Right. And also, there's a note here that no other mitigations were offered, so it seems like you just got to patch it.
Yep, that is it. Just go fix it now.
All right. Well, slightly related as we get into the news, Backbox, they make network management software for tasks like backing up and recovering network devices and managing configuration files. They've announced new features in their 8.0 version that includes support for Meraki, where you can do things like schedule device imports into staging for validation, validate Meraki configurations against industry policies or your own custom policies, and identify orphan devices. 8.0 also includes new states for tracking device life cycles, including a staging state, an active state, an ignored state, and an orphan state. That's sad. The new release.
But you're putting the most interesting thing next.
Yes, well, I didn't realize how timely it was with our red alert, but the new release also introduces a feature called CVE Workaround Insights. It aims to help network and security teams quickly identify CVEs in their environments that have workarounds, so things like configuration changes. So if a patch or a software upgrade isn't available or currently isn't feasible for your work process, the network and security teams can opt to implement the workarounds. And yeah, I think as we've seen from our weekly red alert section, hundreds or even thousands of vulnerabilities are getting announced every week. And always the question is, am I affected? Well, if you need to know, answer that, you have to know what your inventory is. And then am I on an affected OS version or whatever? And then yes, if I am affected, are there workarounds? Are there remediations that I can put in place if I'm not ready or able to patch at the moment? So yeah, a nice feature, I think, from Backbox 8.0 here.
I think it's interesting also. Just a quick question, though. It's not clear to me from this announcement whether this is purely for workarounds, i.e. scenarios where patching isn't a fix, or whether this will help with patching. So will it automatically suggest a patch, or will it just sort of say, oh, the solution is patching, go do it, or there is no solution, here's a workaround?
Yeah, I think they already have in the product portfolio a way to help you track CVEs as part of their inventory management. So you can understand which CVEs are affected. But instead of you having to dig into the CVE to find out, is there a workaround available, it will surface this information up to you. Yes, a workaround is available. It's not going to implement the workaround for you, but it is going to identify it for you. So the idea is they're helping you get that information more quickly.
Oh, okay. But I was just asking for the specific case of, is it only workarounds, or are they using workarounds as a superset for patches?
No. They can also let you know if a patch is available. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So basically that takes it another level. If patch, go patch. If no patch, here's workaround.
Right. Yep.
Okay, well, that is good news, and hopefully many of you are using it. So I guess I will modify my comment on the previous one and say, hey, if you definitely should deploy the patch, no other workaround is available, but you might also want to consider using Backbox or something equivalent if you aren't already.
Yeah.
Because that does sound useful. Moving right along, you heard it here first. 2 weeks ago, we announced the completion of the Alternate Ethernet Consortium's release of version 1.0 of the protocol specification, and we noted then that NICs would be shipping soon. Well, soon is now. AMD announced re-announced the Pensando Polara 400, a 400 gigabit per second NIC, back in October of 2024, and has had pre-spec versions in limited release this year. Now they're announcing not only the fully compliant version, and that they are shipping fully compliant cards, They announced this at their recent Advancing AI event. They are also announcing a customer, which is Oracle's Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, which is the showcase customer for the NICs, which are designed for massive scale out use cases. For broader availability, that is, if you want to use them and you are not Oracle, they promise them in the second half of the year. AMD also decided to announce the successor, an 800 gigabits per second system called Volcano. So you can check out the show notes if you're interested in that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how smart NICs get incorporated into data center operations, because the idea is you can offload things like some security capabilities or other packet processing functions on these NICs. Obviously, in the AI infrastructure space, there's also folks interested in taking advantage of that extra processing power to help manage all of these intense workloads.
Yep, absolutely. And the fact that we've been able to push Ethernet well beyond what its inventors really imagined. And okay, I'm speaking on Bob Metcalf's behalf, but I do know that they really, all of us at the time were thinking 800 gigabits never happening. I mean, not who would need that, right?
Right.
What's that great quote attributed to Bill Gates? Like the world market for computers is like 12 or something.
Right, right.
But anyway, or I may be conflating two, but you get the idea.
Yes.
Moving right along to things we never thought were going to happen. Drew, you wanna kick off some of the quantum discussions?
Yeah, we've been having some quantum stories pop up. I think last week we talked about Toshiba and Orange, a service provider, offering an actual quantum networking or quantum key distribution service in Paris. We've got a couple other quantum stories we'll cover today. First, Juniper Networks says it's validated a proof of concept in which it integrated quantum key distribution with MACsec and IPsec to protect timing signals and encrypt data in a mobile backhaul network. They performed this proof of concept validation in partnership with Turkcell, that's a Turkish ISP, and with a company called ID Quantique, which makes hardware for quantum key distribution. So Juniper says Turkcell wanted to make sure it could protect against attacks that target the timing signals that Turkcell uses. And in particular, Turkcell is using Precision Time Protocol and Sync-E protocol. Attacks against timing signals in a mobile backhaul network could disrupt services or expose customer location data or cause network instability. So by employing quantum key distribution, Turkcell is hoping to get resiliency against quantum attacks. The POC incorporated Juniper ACX and MX routers and SRX firewalls, along with that key distribution hardware from ID Quantique. John, I feel like quantum's your bailiwick, so thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is actually a very clever use of quantum key distribution because people don't realize how vulnerable the timing signals are. In fact, I've talked recently about the need for protecting timing signals and protecting, for example, GPS against spamming and blocking and other attacks and timing protocols. The one issue I would pick with the announcement is. Attacks against timing signals in a mobile backhaul network could disrupt services, et cetera, et cetera. Any network. It's pretty much
Sure,
timing
sure.
signals are
Yeah.
absolutely foundational. And I think that's something, if nothing else, I think people should take away from this announcement. Hey, timing signals are actually vulnerable. There are solutions, and quantum key distribution is one.
Yep.
And now a brief sponsor message from iTential. If you're like me, your network automation skill set is an evolving one. You've probably done some Ansible and Python work and you've had some quick wins, but now you're getting to that point where you want other people in your team to use the automations that you've built. They're sort of okay with Ansible, right? They're definitely not 100%, but they're okay. However, they do not want to figure out Python, and they can't even manage the library dependencies. Most of the folks on your team, what do they want? They want you to give them a thing that they can run and it just works. And if it doesn't, any network task requiring automation comes back to your queue. I call this the platform problem. You need a platform that the whole team can use to run automations without them having to know anything about maintaining a Python environment or even how to run an Ansible playbook. And this is the service iTential provides across their product portfolio. You've created a bunch of network automations. All right, now move them from your laptop into a repository and then let iTential execute them in a scalable, secure way that abstracts details from people that don't need to know, while giving access to every nuance for those people that do need to know, people like you. iTential puts you on the road to self-service network automation, allowing anyone you like to run your automation, all while integrating with all the other systems that your organization runs. And to me, this is the ultimate destination for network automation systems, self-service. To find out more about Itential's products and how they help you build an automation platform, visit itential.com. You can test drive Itential free for 30 days. That is itential.com.
All right, so sticking with quantum, the quantum networking startup, I don't know, Connect, it's spelled Qunnect. I'm going to go with Connect, has raised $10 million in a Series A funding round, including funding from Cisco Investments. Cisco Investments is the venture funding arm of Cisco. The funding round was led by Airbus Ventures. So Connect was spun out of a research project at Stony Brook University. It's making hardware that it claims can, quote, deploy quantum entanglement-based protocols over commercial fiber. Cisco says it's interested because Connect is aiming to build entanglement-based quantum networking over existing fiber. I'll note in 2023, Connect posted a blog about a successful test in New York City where they say they distributed and preserved entanglement between two locations over 10 miles of fiber, quote, at a rate of 15,000 pairs per second over 10 miles of real fiber with 99% uptime and no cryogenic detectors. So I think, I always thought, quantum networking, quantum computing requires like very specialized gear, kind of in contained environments, maybe needed to be kept very cold. They're saying we can run this gear in regular environments over existing fiber and still give you some quantum benefits.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, depending on how you do it, photonic qubits actually don't need to be kept at, cryogenic temperatures. One thing I'm going to pat myself on the back on here is we actually have a technology area benchmark deliverable that we cover. We cover what has happened in a space and how it changes quarter over quarter. And I still don't know how to say it either. It's either Connect or Connect, but that was one of the bellwether companies that we started tracking because of this result. So interesting to see this. And of course, as we know, Cisco often likes to go from investor to owner, and they love to own things that make their hardware more valuable and that they can sell hardware. So, this is an interesting directional move by Cisco, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't find out how much. It was a 10 million round. I don't know how much Cisco contributed, but let's just assume it was a million or two. That's a really cheap hedge, for this technology, which has a lot of potential. No widespread commercial adoption yet, but for 2, 3, 4 mil, whatever, it's easy for Cisco to get in on the ground floor, particularly of a hardware company, a company selling you a box, which Cisco is good at.
Yes, absolutely. So watch this space. I think you're going to be seeing more and more quantum announcements. And just a reminder that if you're listening to this and thinking quantum's still 30 years away, that thing will never fly, Orville, you may want to reconsider that. Just saying. And speaking of flying, moving right along, Amazon is inching forward in its low Earth orbit satellite network deployment, or more specifically, it is doubling the size of its Project Kuiper satellites by launching its second batch of 27, continuing a build-out that was begun just a few months ago back in April. The launch comes a week late after the original June 6th attempt was scrubbed due to unacceptable engine sensor readings. The United Launch Alliance, which is what sent the satellites up in an Atlas V rocket, reported all the satellites in the launch achieved their intended orbits, and they've got another 6 launches planned for these ULA Atlas V rockets, followed by, wait for it, 38 more launches aboard the Atlas's more powerful successor, the Vulcan, and launches on other heavy lift vehicles from Arianespace and Blue Origin, that would be the Amazon company, or rather the Jeff Bezos company, all with the goal of meeting the FCC's requirement that approximately half the planned constellation of 3,200 satellites be deployed by July 2026, which to me still is mind-boggling because at this point we have no idea. All those little glittery things up in the sky are mostly satellites at this point, not stars.
Yes, it does seem like it's getting crowded up there. And they've essentially then got a year to launch, what is it? So a lot of satellites.
All the rest. Yes, all the rest. That would explain why they're launching 27 now, and then they're going to be doing 38 more launches. 38 more launches, not 38 more satellites, which is...
Right, they have to get 1,600 satellites into orbit before July 2026, I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge to be fighting. Yes.
Yeah, I also noticed you said United Launch Alliance. Is that a private space launch company? Because I noticed SpaceX didn't come up here, which I think
Well,
Kuiper has used in the past.
Yes. I'm not sure. Actually, I have not dug into who the United Launch Alliance is, but I did also notice the lack of the lack of SpaceX here as
Yeah,
well.
SpaceX. Yeah.
I think they're having a few troubles, is what I would say.
hmm And it also makes sense, as you mentioned, Blue Origin. That's Jeff Bezos's rocket startup, essentially.
A- Absolutely. They really need to be, bringing home the bacon and cooking it, using their own, or what do they call it? Sipping their own champagne.
Right.
Cisco's SVP told me that Cisco prefers to say that versus eating their own dog food because dog food is gross, but champagne is tasty.
Honestly, I think champagne's a little gross myself, but I would take that over dog food any day. So yeah, I'll go with you on that.
Yes, yes, there we go.
All right, links in the show notes if you want to read up about some space networking. Moving on, Cloudflare has announced it can now support containers on its cloud platform. Containers are available in beta for users on paid plans. The containers are being tightly coupled to Cloudflare Workers. This is Cloudflare's serverless platform for serverless applications running in hundreds of Cloudflare data centers globally. For pricing, Cloudflare says changes begin when a request gets sent to a container or if the container is manually started. Charges stop when the container instance goes to sleep. I think most people put Cloudflare, including me, into sort of like the DNS and WAN acceleration buckets, but they are also moving into trying to become a cloud player, a la Amazon, Google, and so on. And this is the next step in that execution.
Yep, that's about it. And speaking of cloud news, this falls into the category of not particularly glitzy news, but something of interest to network engineers. So listen up. Microsoft is preparing users for a major change in Azure networking behavior this fall. Come October 1st, 2025, anyone who's deploying virtual machines in Azure will have to explicitly provide outbound external internet access for them. That's because September 30th is the last day on which Azure's current default behavior, which is assigning a public IP address to anything that did not explicitly allocate an outbound networking method, will be in effect. So they're stopping that as of end of the day, September 30th, and starting October 1st. You will need to explicitly allocate connectivity for anything outbound. Microsoft is emphasizing that anything created before the change will be fine. So you don't have to go back and reverse engineer anything. But if you start creating machines after September 30th, you will need to modify your deployment recipes. And very specifically, if you're a network engineer listening to this, please reach out to your cloud folks and suggest that they modify their recipes, playbooks, and scripts to explicitly allocate connectivity any place they've been relying on the Azure default behavior.
Okay, so this does sound like a significant change. Do you have any insight on why they're now not having
My guess
default
is they're just
outbound
running out
access?
of Yeah, my guess is they're just running out of outbound IP addresses, or they simply want to conserve them for something else, which is legit. I mean, really, these things have value, and why would you be sort of giving them away for free? What's interesting is I don't know if it's possible to go out and pay for them. I don't know if that's one of the options that Microsoft is providing. Probably not. They probably don't want to get caught up in the details of such a thing, and you just have to you get your own addresses and your own connectivity yourself.
My assumption was maybe this was security related because I presume Azure's running on V6 and address scarcity shouldn't really be an issue.
That is an excellent point. I was thinking about that when I was saying it. It could be a security issue. It honestly, it doesn't seem to it doesn't seem to apply because it's sort of I guess what I'm thinking about is all it really does is say we're not going to slap a public IP address on the outbound, but you can. So I don't see how it really improves security. Is kind of what I'm thinking.
I mean, I guess my assumption was if you were setting up a VNet and you didn't realize it was publicly reachable, now that maybe people got into trouble being like, oh, wait, I didn't know anyone could just sort of ping this from the internet. Now, by making this a default choice, you have to
Yeah,
you have to decide like, yes, I want this to be publicly reachable.
that kind of makes sense, but I mean, it makes sense a lot, but it just seems like it's a very bass-ackwards way of getting to that point, and there could have been easier ways to do it. It's sort of like, I don't know, it's weird because it's sort of like, oh, we are sort of not silently, but we're taking away external access to this,
Mhm.
to this virtual machine, and you'll discover by default that nobody can get to it. Why not just tell you?
Right.
Why not just be like, oh, hey, guys, we can assign do you really want us to assign a public IP address? Click here if you want it. And then you've got the awareness issue covered.
Right.
So there seems to be something more to that. And that's why my thoughts immediately went to address scarcity. But you're right, it makes no sense. I mean, there's effectively an infinite number of IPv6 addresses. And of course, Azure is on v6 because Microsoft was one of the early adopters way back when.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not quite sure why they're doing this, but it's one of those things that at least we have to give them credit for announcing it and telling everybody about it. Every now and then vendors will do something that's a major headachy change and not tell you. We recently had a big fight with one of our vendors, who shall remain nameless, who made a very significant change and then claimed it hadn't made the change and then acknowledged it made the change and then provided the workaround. And we were like, that's backwards. How about just saying we're making this change? Here's the workaround. So at least Microsoft did that. Yay.
I appreciate them actually, trying to get out in front of something like this. And as you were reading or talking about this, I was like, October, that's far away. I don't have to pay attention that much. But then the way time goes these days, I'm like, actually, that's closer than you might think. So
exactly. And it's it gives you plenty of time to change your playbooks, but not so
Yes.
much time that you'll forget about it.
Right. Yeah. So get that on your calendar. And if you've got insight into why Microsoft might be doing this, hit us up, packetpushers.net/FU. We do love crowdsourcing some of our show. So
And let me just remind everybody, if you're reaching out to packetpushers.net/FU, you can do so anonymously. We don't need to know who you are.
Yep.
So
Yep.
just heads up.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're shy, that's fine. We respect that. So that's the news. Jonna, where can folks get more from you?
I'd prefer if people hit us up at my company website, which is nemertes.com, nemertes.com. You can just fill out the contact form and I'll get right back to you. You can also track me down on LinkedIn. I post idiosyncratically and randomly there, but certainly respond to anybody that reaches out to me there.
Fantastic. I'm Drew Conner Murray, also on LinkedIn, and I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM. I'm also blogging on packetpushers.net. Thanks to Itential for being our sponsor today, and thanks to you for listening. Don't forget, besides this podcast, we've got merch, a dozen other podcasts you can subscribe to, an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, the aforementioned community Slack group, a YouTube channel, an IRC group, and more. It's all at packetpushers.net, free, no login required. As always, thanks for listening.